Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. All right, hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about getting perspectives from people who are outside of your area of expertise. And we're going to talk specifically about how that external sort of perspective can not only drive your business forward, but can find gaps in what you're doing so that you can deliver better products and services and grow your company. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited for this topic.
Thank you, Dawn. Excited to dive in.
All right. Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Bieniek. I have been in a very interesting career path, usually always being the outsider. So I focus very much now on helping the disruptor in whatever world that is, help you bring disruption to your environment, be that your clients, your customers, your company, in a way, in a currency, in a language that they can understand.
I love it. So when we were talking about how you got into this role of disruptor, can you give everyone kind of your background from what you thought you were going to do, where you actually ended up doing it, and then we can kind of dive in as to how that's a strength and not necessarily a weakness.
Well, I don't know how far back you want to go, but when I was 10, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. So I've kind of gone far away from that, I believe. My undergrad degree is in English, and I very much thought I was going to pursue my master's in fine arts and go the writing route. And I ended up somewhat last minute taking a hard pivot into business. And I really liked the idea of business. I did go after my MBA. The idea that it's so universal, it's transferable across industries, geographies, all sorts of things. It's just the same business principles apply. And when you really get to the root and the heart of that, it's because all businesses are run by people, and people are people. Anywhere you go, you will always find similarities amongst people. So that universality is what drew me to business. And I ended up working in a few different industries. I worked in higher education for a bit. I worked in publishing for a bit. And I like to say I fell into technology. It was just a fortuitous move at the time when my husband and I were getting married and moving across country, and there was a lot going on all at the same time. I was in a new state, a new place, finishing my MBA, had already had a few years' experience in other industries, and conversations led to things, and I just fell into technology. That being said, I think tech sometimes gets a bad rap as it's just engineering. It's just people that care about numbers. They don't care about people. It's just this certain thing. And it's really not. Technology is made up of people, just like every other industry. I was working for a large corporation, and there were all different facets and groups in there. And I spent the first few years really trying different organizations, saying, great, what's this group do? And okay, why do we do this? And learning a lot about the space and the technology space that I was in. And I like to say it was the asking why that got me into trouble and opened up a lot of opportunities. And one thing led to another. I ended up in a strategy role that was really looking at where are we going long term? Are we doing the right things for our organization and making sure that we'll be relevant down the road? And in the process of doing that, I started looking at new technologies, fringe technologies, emerging tech, and saying, these have the potential to be very disruptive to what we're currently doing. Could we do something here? Sometimes naivety goes a long way. And right. So not knowing what I didn't know, that opened up some more doors. And that led me into a very long-term project of basically running a small startup inside of a big tech corporation. And I did that for several years, learned so much in the process, which is what prompted me to write a book. And I'm sure we'll dive into that in a bit. But writing the book and branching out on my own is where I'm at now.
Amazing. So you have an English degree, you work for a tech startup, and you and I had conversations prior to recording this around the idea that is sometimes viewed, this outsider perspective is viewed a little bit with suspicion, that if you didn't have an engineering degree, how could you be asking the engineers or, those kinds of things? And I wonder, across industries and across things that we do, how many times the outsider who may have a great idea or see a gap isn't actually given the opportunity to express that because they don't have perceived experience or perceived, bona fides in that particular space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that occurs again and again in every industry, and not necessarily to the fault of people trying to be closed-minded or not looking othering opinions. It's just we
Right.
end up staying comfortable. It's human nature to want to be comfortable and say like, all right, this is a known. I'm going to stick with that.
Right.
Anything that's too far away from that, that's kind of uncomfortable. So I think there's a natural human tendency to shy away from that. And then inside of business, especially large corporations, well, I would say it's inside large corporations, but it's the same if you're running a small organization because you have a lot on the line. And there's the desire to stay safe and say like, okay, I'm not going to go too far away. I'm going to stick with what I know, stick with people I know, stick with pedigree I know. This has worked in the past. It's going to work in the future. And there's danger in that assumption because the world changes, and specifically in certain fields like technology that change very rapidly. If you stick with what you know, you will soon be left behind. So I think finding that person or that organization that's willing to look at, okay, maybe I don't know everything. maybe there are some possibilities that I hadn't considered. You start getting into a lot more interesting and creative conversations.
Right. And I agree with you. I don't think people are trying to be closed-minded. I think, like you said, they're trying to be safe. This is
Yes.
for us. This is what we know will generate revenue. This is the next logical step, right? And as the outsider, I think you probably sometimes brought things that didn't appear logical to some of the other groups at first glance. So how do we have that conversation if you do see a gap or you are someone in a company, small, large company, and you see something that could be very beneficial? What are some of the ways that you were able to introduce these concepts in a way that was non-threatening, in a way that allowed people to kind of sit with it for a while and see some of the benefits? Was this always a value-based conversation? Was this a what-if conversation? Is this a have we imagined conversation? How did you get in there?
Yeah, and I think I evolved over time of my approach on this. I think when younger in my career, I was very compartmental of just, this is my work life and my work persona, this is my outside work persona, and never the twain shall meet. And I thought that was the ideal way you should move forward. I thought everybody else should operate the same way. And then I got older and I got kids and I got messy life, and you realize there's just overlap. And if you have a rough day because you got in a fight with your spouse or something happened in your personal, it's going to affect your work, whether you want it to or not. Doesn't matter how great you are at compartmentalizing. So I think as I became more aware of that for myself, it opened me up to be much more aware of that for other people, and realizing, hey, if I'm trying to bring an idea that maybe this is not the way Dawn normally does it, this is not what she's encountered before. I know even talking to her, she's got this different view on it, but I want to open her up to this other idea. I have to think about, who are you as a person? Like, what is driving you? What is motivating you? Where are you at in your career? What do I think you are trying to accomplish right now? Make a name for yourself. And like, what do you value as success? And then think about my idea and how do I translate that into the language that you are speaking? How do I make that something that you care about? Because it aligns now with what you're trying to do, what your mission is, what you value, what you find important. So it's a lot of playing translator. Yeah, I've got this thing over here. You speak this language over there. How do I communicate this in your language?
Yeah, I like that. That requires, though, that you take the idea and it's not the idea itself. It's the investment in the other person to see your idea. So you actually have to have some kind of relationship and investment before they maybe will consider the outsider perspective or the perspective that was not safe or in line, or the I guess the initial idea of what would happen next. And being the disruptor, when you say you're the disruptor in certain roles, I'm sure that translates differently to different people based on their role in the company, but then also their perceived level of we want to do things, but we want to do things like that, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, even the term disruptor, I think, is somehow translated differently to different people. So
Absolutely. You understand people's level of risk aversion very quickly when you use that terminology.
Right. And that was going to be my next kind of question or thing of questions. So you have this perspective, you have this gap that you've identified, you understand the person's values and things, but yeah, risk aversion, maybe that's not the right person to bring something to. Or how do you also kind of put this in a way that you are showing up front that you're not just trying to hit them with something new and different and that they're going to have to do all of that work to accept it? Do you do the work up front and present it that way?
Well, it helps that I laugh a lot.
Okay. Laughing.
Disarming people certainly helps, I think, to an extent. I grew up in upstate New York where sarcasm is a love language, and everything should be a joke. And if you're not having fun, you're not laughing every day, something's wrong. Right. So I noticed a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with someone who is an expert in their field, their identity is really tied to that label. And I have to be this expert in this area. This is what I'm known for. This is what I'm good at. And they somewhere along the way lose the fun part of that.
Okay.
A lot of times people can just come to it as like, to show how qualified I am, I have to have this persona of how serious I am.
Okay.
And I do find it is very disarming when you laugh, smile, joke a little bit. Like, we're people, we're having a chat. Sure, we're trying to accomplish something, but the harder you're trying to do something, usually the more levity you have to add to it. If you've ever spent time with paramedics or firefighters or people in these very dangerous fields, they're usually some of the funniest people. Anytime you have a huge amount of seriousness and gravity, you have to almost balance that out. And so I do, I say that a little lightly of trying to, I laugh a lot, but it is true. I do find a lot of times when I have a first conversation with somebody, they're like, that's not how I thought it was going to go. Like, I have an idea, but we're talking about this big topic, or we're talking about disrupting this space, or talking about really changing the strategic direction of where we're going. This is going to be a painful slog of a conversation. And then I realized we're just having a chat to see if we can find a way to do something better. That's not scary. That's not intimidating. And that doesn't have to be serious.
Right. So let's talk about flipping it around. How do we receive this information? So, again, we're business owners. We're always kind of looking for the next thing. We should be strategically planning. We should have these ideas, but we need to be open to these opportunities and perspectives that allow us to do our zone of genius better. So as a business, as a company, as a leader in these, how can you be more open and receptive to the ideas of the outsider, right? Not prejudging, not making assumptions maybe about what this is going to take as far as worker resources and stuff, and being a little more open. What are the steps that we can take to make sure that we are hearing the goodness and the things that can actually move us forward?
Yeah. I think making sure that you're focused on diversity of thought, not just all the other areas of diversity. I think it's great that we have an effort and a focus to make sure that we're not just talking to people that look like us.
Right.
But we could be talking to people that look different from us, but think just like us. And that's still not diversity. So having a leader that's focused on, are the people that I'm listening to when I'm running a focus group, when I'm having a staff meeting, when I'm vetting an idea, is there diversity of thought in this group? And that often lends itself to other kinds of diversity because people come from different backgrounds and have different experiences. But you really want the people that are going to look at things a little bit different, a different angle, a different view, and challenge you. I think the second part of that is you want to attract the diversity of thought, but then you have to be open to receiving that.
Right.
And that's on you to make everyone else know that you are open to that. Because you can't just assume like, oh, everybody's just going to bring their really tough, challenging, differing opinions to me. Because especially if you're in a position of leadership, a lot of times that's frowned upon. I don't want the challenge. I've already made my decision before I came into this room. If somebody is going to just come up and raise a big point that's in contrary to what I have, that could be career suicide. So people oftentimes are already a little shy to bring up those big ideas. So if you want that, if you really want to hear all the differing opinions, have the rebuttals, have the counter arguments, you have to set the tone first. And sometimes that comes with picking holes in your own assumptions and theories. It might say, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's my thoughts on this. Here's where I'm stuck. Or here's where I think we should do this, but in my immediate reaction to that, we're going to run in this issue and I'm not sure how to move forward on that. What are your thoughts on that? You have to give first. You have to admit that you don't know everything, that there's something that you need help in. And then you have to be open and receptive when somebody brings up those ideas. You're like, okay, wait, let's talk about that, not just immediately shoot it down. And I think a lot of times because as leaders, we are very decisive because we have to be. So it's very quick to say, somebody brings, we can't do that because blah, 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 and then move on to the next thing. And it's fine if you have information you've experienced it or encountered it before, and you know, okay, yes, we've tried that and it's not going to work. But be mindful of how you convey that to your team or to your advisors, because if you're shooting something down and not explaining a little bit of why and still inviting more feedback on that, you have to make sure it's saying that idea won't work because we've done this, but I like the way you're thinking. What else you got? Kind of make sure that you're inviting more from that person. So I think it's really on us to create that environment.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is a skill. And like you said, as you got older and you were meeting with different groups and meeting with different people, that as we evolve as leaders and adults, it is our job to provide that, what I call psychological safety, right? So no one is going to be, in the military, we call it sharpshooting, right? Like no one's going to sharpshoot your ideas, or no one's going to try to, you know, make themselves look better by taking you down kind of thing, right? There needs to be that perception that it's not just we're saying we're inviting all your ideas, when in reality the actions that come from that is not really inviting your ideas, right? So you know, I do want to talk a little bit about the strategy if you have a good idea. And we talked a little bit about, you know, understanding where the other person's risk is, or understanding some of those things. When you come with an idea, a disruptive idea, what do you think the responsibility is of the person, not just based on who it is they're going to talk to, but just generally, how much should we maybe flesh it out, or should we have a list of questions? So the strategy of, I have this idea, I want to bring this in, I have thought about it, I think it's kind of cool. You know, do you do a quick cost benefit analysis and say, oh, I think this, we'd have to dig into the numbers, but, you know, I'm looking at this, and like you said, it's technology that's, you know, adjacent to us, maybe we should look at it. How much information did you bring before even the idea, you know, was presented, so that maybe made it a little more receptive? I mean, the first time you did it was probably different, but by your sixth time or your eighth time, you know, how did you present it? And how should we consider presenting these disruptive ideas to leadership?
Yeah, it's definitely different depending on the audience and the forum, and what are you trying to accomplish that. I mean, if it's an open brainstorming session, you can be off the cuff and just bring an idea. Like, I just had this idea as I'm thinking and looking out the window at this sparrow over here. That's a little bit different than if you're walking into an executive briefing trying to get them to make a decision on the spot. So your level of preparation should definitely line up with the activity itself. I'm a big fan, however, of small and quick to get feedback. So I actually have a free downloadable on my website that's 5 steps to unlock action, and it's really talking about, can you do these little mini things of testing out? I have a new idea. What do we do? What do I do first? What's that first step? And then taking a small action, getting feedback, and then, okay, now next step, take small action, get feedback, and then next step. And I think with most ideas, if you take that small mini step approach to it, and, you know, my magic number is 5, but you might find a different process that works for you, it really defines how much time and effort and information you're bringing into it. It's all aligns well with the fail fast concept of don't go too far into it, but you do need some level of preparation. If I want to give an example, I would say with my book Cake on Tuesday is all based on the time frame of my career when I was leading a internal startup that eventually became WebEx Hologram. And in the process of that, it started out with just investigation. It started out with, are we missing something? That was the question we're trying to answer, and say more from a strategy perspective. When we're looking at this organization at the time, it was the collaboration technology group, and saying, are we missing something in the industry that if we're not acting on, researching, building, developing, this could come back to bite us 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road?
Interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
Say that is so relevant no matter the industry. So just because you're not in the tech space, how often should we sit down and say, are we missing something in the industry, right? We talk about market research and stuff, but I mean, how often did you do that? And make sure you invested the time to sit back and say, are we missing something?
I'm a huge fan of that exercise. And I think it's something we should do personally too. I actually was having this conversation with someone earlier this week about, I always like to take the month of January to think through what is this year? What is this year ahead have in store for me? What do I want to accomplish by the time this year is done? Where do I want to be compared to where I am today? And rather than, I just got in this whole debate about this, of looking at things that are tangential changes to where we are now, or do you do more of this white paper exercise of say, let me just set aside for a moment, just give myself the luxury of thinking and dreaming, and set aside all of the things of, the bills I have to pay, the clients I have to serve, whatever it is that's on my plate today. Let me just put that aside and think more from this blank sheet of paper, what do I want to accomplish? And starting from that perspective, if those two things align, if you do the exercise with everything now and the tangential growth and the white paper exercise and they align, fantastic. If you do them both and your answers and outcomes you're getting to are very different, then you need to look at your current operating process. So I think in any industry, you can apply that and say, where are we trying to go and what needs to be done to make sure that we are not caught by surprise down the road. So that was step one in that project. And then that investigation led to, here's an area where it could be impactful to us. In that specific instance, it was augmented reality. And so I started digging more into that. Let me research. And then it's going to all the shows and conferences and expo floors and seeing what's out there and talking to startups, talking to incubators, talking to people, getting outside of yourself and outside of what you know, doing the research. I'm a big fan of feet on the street and seeing what you can find out and just having conversations with people. And then going from there, okay, now I have information. Once I've gathered that information, how does it apply to my business? Now I can do a new white paper exercise of saying, I now have this new basis of research and all this new information I didn't have before, knowing that if I want to look at where should we be going, how does that translate?
Right. I love this process. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did want to kind of bring this around because as leaders, even if we have a team of 4 or we're, a very small company, if we're not stepping back and asking on the regular, what are the gaps or where are we maybe missing an opportunity to serve or do something different or better, to your point, even if you're not in tech, the market will pass you by. So this,
I think all of us who have been in any business for any period of time can probably all think of an example of something where, we're doing this one thing and I really focused on optimizing that process and making it flow, making it smooth and making sure I removed all the friction and it just got that process dialed. And then I finally got a chance to stop and reflect and realize that was the wrong process.
Yeah.
So rather than wait till then, taking that pause early on and say, am I going in the right direction first? Before I start making sure I can go faster, am I going in the right direction?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So then the next episode, we do the investigation on the steps. And it sounds like the idea is you move a little, you evaluate and tweak, move a little, evaluate and tweak on that path. And as you're moving along the path and evaluating and tweaking, are you still including all the outsiders, right? All of the different perspectives, letting people give a lot of feedback for you to make sure, like you said, you're not wasting time, energy, resources, and putting in the wrong thing that you think was, the right at the time. So what are your thoughts kind of on the implementation of these disruptive ideas? How can we best do those so that we, again, are moving the ball forward without finding that we made a $200,000 mistake?
Yeah. But back to my idea of the 5 steps to unlock action, your first team should be tiny. It might be a team of 1, it might be a team of 2, it might be a team of 5, depending on the business or idea, but it should be very small. And you should have some sort of question you are trying to answer that you can answer within a matter of weeks. That should be step 1, because then you're getting your quick win of, okay, is this technologically feasible? Is this the right move for my business? Is now the right time for the market to be receptive for this? Some sort of question that you're answering. And that should be a single phase, however you want to describe it. And the end outcome there, you have a go, no-go decision. So based on that decision, and you have to be, when it's hard when it's you and yourself and your own business to be strict about it, but you have to be hard on yourself and say, I gave myself 6 weeks. and this amount of money and this amount of people and resources to answer this question. And in 6 weeks, I answer that question. And if the answer is not, if I have not proven the answer is yes, and the answer is no, it's one or the other. So I think being very strict on yourself and setting that up, but then you need to be ready for the next phase. Okay, if I answer that question and it's yes, then what? And it's great if you have a rough idea of that always sort of tickling in your mind. So you should be ready with your plan for the next phase before you hit your exit of your current phase. Because the answer is yes, then you want to hit the ground running and like phase 2, great, let's go, let's do this. And now it's a new question, and now it's a new time frame. And usually those time frames are getting a little bit bigger each time. You might go from a matter of weeks to a matter of months, but I'm a big fan of never having a phase more than 4 to 6 months. I don't care what your industry is, what your business is, what your project is. Never have something more than four to 6 months, because anytime you start getting longer than that into these multi-year projects, multi-year efforts, and you don't have a clear definable outcome, that's when things get sloppy. And that's when you start losing momentum. And that's when you start wandering a little bit in the wilderness and losing your direction. So if it is something that, hey, this is a big, huge, gnarly process and it's going to take me 2 years before the market's ready, before this, whatever it is, gets developed, before I can get the response on this. Okay, great. 2 years, that's your mega end goal. Awesome. Within those 2 years, what are all your mini goals? And you should have something. Maybe it's every quarter, maybe it's every 6 months. But what is that clear, definable outcome for each of those that ensures, yep, got that, moving on to the next one, still have that North Star of my goal for 2 years from now, but we're making progress along the way.
You brought up something very, very important, and that is kind of the timing of the market and whether or not they'll be receptive. And what are your thoughts on having a great idea? The time is just not right. We'll revisit it in X amount of time. I think that is such an incredible skill, that you're not trying to force something where it is going to cost you. And there's of course a lot of stuff about whether or not you have first mover advantage or second mover advantage. Like that stuff is written in millions of books. But what are your thoughts on good ideas that are maybe just not quite yet what we would call ripe, right, or ready for the market? And what do you do with those? Do you shelve them? Do you revisit them? Do you get a different team looking at them after a period of time? What are the things that we can do with these big, awesome goals that we have, with these great ideas that we're like, maybe not now.
Yeah. I think probably the best way to describe this is talking about kids. So I have 3 little kids who are 10 and under, little kids. And one of the things we're going right now is the whole thing of when you have an idea, you have a thought, you want to say something, but there's a conversation in the flow. How do you, okay, I've got an idea, I got a thought, I have something I want to interject, but I don't want to interrupt. So how do I hold that? There's a window of opportunity for you to say that. And so it might not be immediate. It might not be right this second, but if you wait, there's a pause in the conversation. Okay, let me try now. And it could be you try then and you get the, hold on, we're trying to finish this thought, not now. So you might have to wait again, and then there's another break, and then, okay, now. So you're looking for when to interject into that conversation. There are capstones of that. There's an end to it of, it's got to be beginning, it's somewhere in the conversation or by the end of the conversation, because once the conversation ends and everybody walks to the separate rooms, my moment has lost. And it's the same in the market of, you're always looking for, okay, the certain factors need to align in order for this to be relevant now. But I think a lot of times we get hung up in the like, I just had this epiphany. I had this like, this could work. I got to do it immediately. But it might not be the right time. There could be other things, the policy things going on, timing things going on, all sorts of factors that are outside of our control that you might have to wait a little bit. And you're kind of like, does it work now? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, okay, wait, I need this other feast to fall into play, and kind of keep in mind on it. But knowing that there's an end to those windows of opportunity as well. I think I'm not a big fan of shelving things for very long, because a lot of times if something is relevant nowish, you have to find that magic window in the next maybe 6, 18, 24 months. But if it goes past that, it's probably not relevant anymore. There's some, it will have to be changed. It'll have to be tweaked. And then that could become a new idea, and you're looking for a new window. So looking for the right opportunity, but within parameters.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that, sometimes businesses hold on to ideas for a very, very long time because they believe they should work. And we have the should word in there. And after a huge expense of time, energy, resources, um, they get to a place where it's exhausted things that shouldn't have, right? And it actually could put the business in jeopardy because we're holding on too long to what we think should happen instead of actually what's happening. So I guess kind of the last place I want to go, right? So as a strategic planner and somebody who's worked in industry for a long time, large businesses sometimes are slow to turn, kind of like the Titanic, right? If they're set up in particular ways, it can be very hard to change or turn the ship or get it to look in a new direction versus like you worked with the smaller startup. They were probably a little more quick and a little bit more agile, if you will, to respond to ideas and look at the marketplace. So if we were to look overall with small businesses, how do we maintain, let's say we've been in business for 10 or 12 years and we have the same 6 or 8 employees. How do we start to realize that we're becoming more like a Titanic, even though we're not the size of IBM, and, less like the startup, which could be actually hurting our business with the shoulds?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is you as the leader of that organization need to stop and pause and realize that's not a luxury. It's not I'm just going to give myself some time to think about this. No, it's a necessity to take that time away. And it might be an afternoon, it might be a day, it might be a week. That your goal is to just get away from the day-to-day stuff, to just let me block out that noise and then think, are we going in the right direction? Could we be missing something? Who should I be talking to about this? When's the last time I've really had this heart-to-heart with my team? What are some of the trends I'm seeing that's maybe indicating my business is starting to slow down and we've gotten over that curve and now things are probably not going to continue on the trajectory they were. So part of it is you yourself have to wrap your head around that. But I think with smaller teams, you almost have an advantage of you don't have to include and sample hundreds or thousands of people. And that does make it easier. I mean, if you have a 6-person organization and you want to do an entire company-wide retreat, you can do that. We're all going to pause operations and have 3 days and just pause and think, and let's do some brainstorming. Let's talk about what's worked and hasn't about this last year, and where do we want to go. And I think that is important to include your people. And again, going back to some of the things we were talking about before, make sure you're creating that environment where you are inviting that diversity of thought. But if you've got the same 4 to 6 people that you've had for years, you're doing something right, because that's pretty amazing that you've got a team still together. So if that's the case, then they've probably got some really good wisdom about what we could do differently or what we could do better. So are you inviting that? Are you making them feel safe to be heard on that? Are you giving them an incentive to bring that up and shake the boat a little bit? So that's, again, on you to create the environment. But if you're in that scenario, it sounds like you're already doing something right.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, the perspective that the outsider view the disruptor is a good thing and doesn't have to be threatening. Also, with this conversation of, let's say you've been in business for 10 years, maybe you're down in the shoulds. There is a place, I think, where we have to get ourselves uncomfortable again, even if things are going, really, really well. And I want to say, just from my own perspective, that sometimes that can be hard to do, because if things are going right, we always respond to crises.
Yeah.
We always respond when things are going sideways, right? COVID forced a lot of businesses online or to create websites that didn't have them before, things like that, because they didn't have a choice. But sitting here talking to you today, we do have the choice to get uncomfortable for the greater good of the company and our fulfillment, over time.
Thinking, another way to look at that too is everything is peaks and valleys. We know this. I mean, the market is peaks and valleys. The physical fitness regime is peaks and valleys. Like, everything is peaks and valleys. And so if you are on a peak, there's this natural inclination to be like, this is going to last forever. Don't change anything. It's going to be forever. But you have the choice to make yourself uncomfortable, to start looking at what's next, or you have the choice to not do that, but you will be made uncomfortable at some point, and it will not be on your terms. So I think when you think about it from that perspective of things will go up, things will go down over and over and over and over again. They have since the dawn of time. If I'm comfortable right now, it's probably there's going to be something that goes down in the future. And Do I want to see if I can get ahead of that? Do I want to do that to myself and get uncomfortable first before it happens to me? It gives you some feeling of I have a little bit of control of this, because that way you're not so shocked when it happens.
Right. Right. Yeah. Business being dynamic and, like you were saying, policies and forces and things that are kind of beyond your control. I do think a lot of entrepreneurs, we are control freaks, right? And that's kind of how we got started to begin with. So again, though, this idea of the outsider view and inviting people to brainstorm with you and do things on the regular, it's healthy, and it's good overall for your personal growth and development as a leader, beyond whatever the business is doing.
And be open to getting feedback from unconventional sources. Like we were just talking a minute ago, if you have a 6-person team, great. Do some thinking on your own, where they should go. Do some thinking with your whole 6-person team. But then when you have an idea of, okay, I think we should pivot in this way, or I think we should do a little bit of growth focused on this area, run that by somebody else who has no bearing on your business. It's, the person who's running the stand you buy your beef at the farmer's market, or, somebody, your friend from a totally different industry, and get that outside perspective for free in most cases, and just get a gut check to see, because a lot of times you can get a very unique perspective for somebody who's coming from a totally different business, and we can be too close to things that we don't see what's really glaringly obvious to other people. And don't think that you have to, walk somebody through this giant PowerPoint and here's all my financials and all this. Just a high-level conversation. That's why I use the example of somebody at the farmer's market. Like, just have a chat with somebody who doesn't know anything about your business and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this, and what do you think? And when you just put it really casually out there like that and just conversational, people will tell you what they think. And if they're not invested in your business, then they have no reason to lie or pad it in some way, or worried what you're going to say. They'll just tell you honestly what they think. If you do that enough times, you'll start seeing patterns, and you start getting some really valuable insight and information that might open your eyes to something you would never have noticed before.
I love that. So where can people find you? Where can they download your 5 steps? Where can they start to commit to being more open-minded to the ideas that there may be gaps out there, and outsiders have fantastic insight a lot of times to help guide the ship?
Sure. You can find me on my website, elizabethbieniek.com. I do have a couple free downloads on there, one being the 5 steps to unlock action. And that's just a way of trying to show how my brain works and how I look at things. And if that's helpful to you, please hop on there, download that, and help yourself. I tried to put everything I learned in the process of leading an internal startup inside of big tech into one quick, snappy read, and that is my book, Cake on Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. And it's really broken down into 8 years of painful lessons into something you could read on a coast-to-coast flight. So if you are interested in that, you can find it on my website, or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. And I'm now on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X at Cake on Tuesday.
Cake on Tuesday. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to put all that stuff obviously down inside the show notes. So if you find this, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, you can go and find Elizabeth the day we launch, or 2 years later. We'll find you. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's really fun to kind of talk about how we can be disruptors and shake things up a little bit. And again, that first step is to make sure you're open-minded to it. And I think that's a growth curve for a lot of us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. Always a pleasure.
All right. I'll talk to everyone next time on the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to dawnkennedy.com. And you can now check us out on YouTube, as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.